Hi folks. I am narrating for the Druid King. So, let's get straight into it. The Kardashev scale ranks civilizations by their energy manipulation capability. For example, a galactic civilization utilizing their local stars as energy sources would vastly exceed our current technological capabilities and rank much higher on the Kardashev scale. This now expands upon the Kardashev scale by adopting a much broader scope, which I believe is the logical endgame. The new approach can be viewed as the full context within which any number of Kardashev scales could be accommodated. The Kardashev scale is contained within point 4 of this new 0 to 10-point conceptual framework. Kardashev must be recognized for first introducing the concept of ranking civilizations. Therefore, this framework is cheesily named the DruidKingashev scale. This approach is not driven by our restricted human perspective or experience. The new scale does not differentiate using any measures such as technological capability, energy efficiency, or knowledge. Therefore, it is not dependent on any of our definitions of such phenomena, nor our arbitrary ranking of achievement in any field. Rather, and this is the crux of this entire approach, the DruidKingashev scale uses the number of accessible dimensions of reality as its key measure. Yes, this is thinking big. This will be explained now, before your very ears, using the following format. Broadly, the number of accessible dimensions of reality, from 0 up to 10, will be covered in sequence. For each number of dimensions, or step on the DruidKingashev scale, I will state what logically follows by increasing the number of dimensions, and what this means, what it results in, what it could look like, what beings could exist, or what civilizations could then follow. Okay, so let's start at the bottom of the scale and establish some principles that will help to understand the higher dimensional realities when we climb further up. 0 dimensions. A single point of no length, breadth, height, nor time that is either there, or not there. This notion equates to the principle of existence. A thing exists or it does not. Philosophically, it is not understood whether something can exist without any physical dimension. However, we as a species only understand the physical world and are not appropriately qualified to discount what amounts to a fairly trivial step. It is also included as it is distinct from the next step in the scale. 0 dimensions allows for only binary or Boolean degrees of freedom, yes or no, 0 or 1 outcomes. Things are not very interesting at this level as complex manifestations are not possible and there is no space-time. No network of any kind is possible with just one thing. Okay. The next step is 1 dimension. Mathematically, this universe can be represented as a line. Things can be here, or there, on the line. There can be more than one thing within the dimension. This introduces the concept of, or potential for, differentiation. 2 degrees of freedom exist, position and length. Emergent properties include the logical concepts of, or, and. Complex manifestations are still not possible, linear networks limiting the maximum possible complexity. Next on the scale. 2 dimensions. This now allows for some finite optionality. Mathematically, the 2D universe can be represented by a graph. That is to say, there are limited or finite degrees of freedom on a flat plane. This is a huge increase in the number of degrees of freedom, when compared to just 1 dimension. Movement in 1 dimension is completely independent of the lower dimension. For example, you can swim breadths in a swimming pool without ever changing how far down the length of the pool you go. In 2 dimensions, you also have the option to move in any flat angle, or across the surface of the pool in any direction. Any network that can be drawn on a sheet of paper can exist. Next level up. 3 dimensions. Time could be any one of these dimensions, so far. These need not necessarily be spatial dimensions to be modeled or graphed in exactly the same way. Time is simply another dimension, which allows us to change our position in the lower dimensions. Mathematically, the 3D universe can be represented as a solid-state cube. This could be 2 spatial dimensions and 1 time dimension, or 3 spatial dimensions. Complex networks exist. And, now relax, as the next step is familiar to us. 4 dimensions. This is our current experience of space-time. We intuitively understand length, breadth, height, and time. Complex manifestations exist, and interact over time. The term, manifestations, includes everything from the Higgs boson, to human beings, to galactic superclusters. It is difficult to picture a 4-dimensional shape, but instead of a 3-dimensional solid-state cube, our universe can be represented as a fluid-state cube, where the fluid movement represents our transport through the time dimension. Mortality is possible, as you know. From the smallest to the largest scales there are finite degrees of freedom which lead to a finite set of potential outcomes, but always following a necessary causal sequence. This sequence, what we experience as the direction of time, has been described scientifically as the second law of thermodynamics, and entropy. Other emergent properties of our 4D universe, and our 4D networks, include consciousness. It is possible, for example, for the question, why, to be considered. This is the universe as we know it, with all its physical laws and cosmological constants. And Led Zeppelin. We are DruidKingashev, Type 4, Manifestations. Let's pause for a second, and take a, too long didn't read, recap. We are now up to speed with our own personal experience. Along the journey, we have established 4 key principles. These are: 1. That adding another dimension provides additional degrees of freedom. 2. You can move in one dimension, independently of the lower dimensional locations. 3. New logical concepts can emerge from additional dimensions. 4. Additional dimensions increase networking capability. Now, let's go beyond where we are today. Where you really want to get to, when you started listening. Hold on to your hat. The next step. 5 dimensions. Type 5 entities could be described as related, immortals. Their universe would still look like our universe, with the history we know from the Big Bang to now. As we introduced another degree of freedom, transport in time and space can be non-sequential. This is essentially the time traveler, or Stargate user as depicted in popular culture. From a network perspective, the linear sequence enabled in one dimension can be transcended. Let's level up. 6 dimensions, where it starts to sound like great fun. Type 6 manifestations could be described as unfamiliar, immortals. To them, the universe would still function and appear like our universe does, with the same physical laws. But, as we introduced yet another degree of freedom, all possible histories of our universe would now be accessible. This is essentially the dimension jumper, as depicted in popular culture, existing in what can be considered an all-histories multiverse. With access to any and every version of our universe, at any time, it would continually be evident that, why, is not an answerable question. Why is merely a request for some direction, to adjust a subjective frame of reference. Of course, our logic could evolve to include additional new questions. Every functioning configuration of the network would exist. Other, unpredictable emergent properties most likely follow from Type 6 and beyond.